Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment. Let's continue Affinity Chaos. Chapter 1640 Escape Plan. Life in the Flesh. The words reverberated in the head of the gnome. He wasn't able to react to it. How could this be possible? How could the person the gnome race dreaded so much dare to come into the gnome world and pretend to be a necromancer? The questions in the head of the gnome were just too much. The level of guts one has to be able to willingly come into a world where every single person wants you dead is incredible, and even this gnome was short of words. Everything happened in a matter of 2 to 3 seconds. He quickly snapped back to his senses, and that was when the threat of danger hit him. His core has been cracked. He wasn't even sure there's a way it can be fixed. He looked at Gray and fear appeared on his face. Even when he was in the 6th stage, he wasn't able to defeat Gray. Now he has dropped to the 4th stage, and he was dropping rapidly. His cultivation burst out and his aura spiked, and without a second thought, part of his body exploded. Boom! Gray was forced to retreat. The gnome self-destructed part of his body to make his escape possible. Unfortunately, he's up against Gray, who was prepared for something like this. Gray didn't panic. He looked at the water below where the explosion happened with a smirk. Did you think I'd leave thinking you're gone? He stretched his hand, and the half part of the gnome was snatched out of the water. His hand firmly on the neck of the gnome. The fear in the eyes of the gnome intensified. He acted like he was escaping, but he knew that he wasn't as fast as Gray, so he wanted to hide and then come out after Gray was gone. Who would have thought Gray kept track of him? Please don't kill me. I'll be your servant. I have information about some things. The gnome screamed, horrified. Gray squinted his eyes as he looked at the man. Of what use are you to me if you're alive? His question was valid since the man's cultivation stage was about to drop from the 1st stage of the sovereign plane to the peak of the venerable plane. I know where they are planning to ambush you. As long as you don't kill me, I'll pass on that information to you. The gnome said in a haste. His core might have been damaged, but as long as he survives, he's certain a few years of cultivation will see him come back to his previous level. Oh, they're planning to ambush me. Gray was a bit curious. He knew those guys would want to stop him, but he didn't know they'd plan an ambush as well. Yes, the location is well thought of. The gnome said hurriedly. Tell me then, where is it? Gray asked. The gnome gritted his teeth as he said, let me go first, then I'll tell you. Gray's hand tightened and the neck of the gnome was seemingly on the verge of being crushed. It seems like you feel like you have a choice in this. An amused smile appeared on Gray's face as he added, do not tell me and I'll kill you. Tell me, and you might be lucky to receive my mercy. The gnome had fear on his face. He could see that Gray couldn't care less if he attempted not to tell him, since from the looks of it, Gray doesn't mind killing him even if he says he has the biggest secret. With no choice, the gnome gave up on the thought of struggling and told Gray the exact location the ambush was being set up. According to the gnome, the others were lined up in a way where they could all assemble at 3 different spots almost instantaneously with the aid of a space elemental talisman created in the gnome world. It's like one owning their personal teleportation array. The positions of most of the gnomes who were waiting to ambush Gray were also astounding. If not for capturing this gnome, it would have been impossible for Gray to know that there's something like this. This will be difficult to deal with. Gray fell deep in thoughts. If he was alone, it would be easier for him to escape from the clutches of these people. The number of gnomes that could appear the moment he is caught will be too much to handle without exposing his true identity. Even with that, he still might not be able to escape unscathed. After all, there are 2 8th stage sovereigns present, and if not for his superior speed, he would have been dead by now. I'll take you with me. If I sense anything wrong with your information, I'll end you first. Before the gnome could even react, it was sealed and tossed into a spatial storage. Gray thought about it and decided to meet up with the others. He wanted to change their escape plan. 2 5th stage sovereigns. N-O, Vel, B, J, N. C, Ohm. The fight with the 6th stage sovereign didn't take more than a few minutes. The 2 5th stage sovereigns were about to catch up. Killing them might not be as easy as the 6th stage gnome. Compared to when he fought against just one gnome, even though he knows he could catch them by surprise with forcefully breaking the link, the time it would take for them to recover is very short, so he might only be able to take one out at that time. If he's unable to kill that one with one move, then there's a chance one of them might be willing to use his life to stop him while the other one escapes. He shook his head, it wasn't worth it. With a flash, he disappeared from the place he was standing. He couldn't let them see him before he left. A few seconds after Gray left, two figures appeared there. They both looked around, trying to sense the aura left here. How did they suddenly disappear? One of them looked around, his expression calm. Do you think it might be the person who stole the item? The other one looked around. Should we let the others know he's still here? What if that fool has already taken him out and taken the treasure for himself? The duo were about to continue when one of them noticed something. Oh, looks like he was defeated. I can sense the aura of him self-destructing his body. If the 6th stage sovereign was forced to self-destruct, it means that the opposition isn't one to be played with. They felt the powerful aura exploding from a distance away. Now they know it was from a 6th stage sovereign self-destructing. Now they were caught in another dilemma. Was the explosion so powerful that it turned the duo into dust? They couldn't help but look at each other, a bit confused. After a while, they left the area. Back on the island, Gray came back and decided to leave this place with his friends. They will head to any safe place that isn't close to any of the places where the ambush is supposed to happen. The plan is to create a teleportation array. This way, he would be the one to sneak through the ambush line, and after ensuring it is safe on his side, he would create another teleportation array there and use it to bring them to him. His plan was feasible, and also reduced the risk of them being caught. To be on a safer side, Gray decided to take the bunny leader with him, while leaving Void with them. With the aid of the bunny leader and its rabbits, he should be safer while sneaking through since it could stand as a lookout, checking out all the places with potential enemies. After completing the teleportation array here, Gray left with the bunny leader. The others didn't have anything to do, so they focused on their cultivation for now. Gray and the bunny leader arrived in a town. According to the gnome he captured, this was the best way to escape from the senses of the stronger experts. The strongest person around this town who was in hiding as a 5th stage sovereign. At the moment, entering the town in an open way might not be a good choice since the gnomes are already aware of the numbers of necromancers and other human slaves in the town. He sneaked into the town and hid somewhere, waiting for the bunny leader's rabbits to pick up the trail of the gnome. Chapter 1641 Speaker Leave. It didn't take long before the bunny leader told Gray he had gotten the location of where the gnome expert was hiding. And to Gray's surprise, the gnome he caught didn't lie. There truly wasn't any other gnome present except this 5th stage sovereign. If Gray didn't know about the set beforehand, there was no way he would have been able to get past this situation. Looks like these guys aren't as cunning as I thought. To be honest, he expected to see one of the 8th stage sovereigns here, but there were no surprises, which came as a slight shock to him. He still didn't let his guard down as he continued forward. The plan was simple: scout out the place and see if there were any further surprises. A day later, Gray sneaked out of the place without facing a single gnome from the group waiting to ambush him. Thinking about it, he almost wanted to release the gnome he caught since he was very sincere with the information, but then again, once this guy is released, then the news of Gray Dawson sneaking into the gnome world would be exposed. Since I'm such a nice person, I'll hold on to him for a little longer. Once I'm done with the battle with the gnomes, I'll let him leave. Gray didn't want to take any chances. He quickly set up the teleportation array on his end and contacted Void, who told the others it was time to leave. They were already tired, so they followed Gray's plan and made the array work in a short time. November LBJNN. Gnome World Capital City. It has been almost 2 weeks or so since Gray and his friends left. The mission was not supposed to last that long, but due to Gray almost getting killed by the miasma, it took longer than expected. The group soon returned to the familiar gates of the capital city. I'm already starting to miss this place. I felt like I belonged here. Klaus sighed as he looked at the gate with emotion. We don't mind leaving you behind if you want. You can continue living like a prince here. Gray leaned close to Klaus as he said with an evil smile on his face. Alas, there are people who will find it hard to continue with their daily lives if I'm not present. Klaus said with a nostalgic voice as he looked into the sky, spaced out. He looked like an old man who had lived for generations and was talking about his old home which might have been decimated. Alice chuckled. She knew Klaus was already out of this place. Staying in a place where they are constantly treated as enemies and would be attacked almost immediately isn't a place anyone would want to stay, especially someone like Klaus who has a knack for causing trouble. Let's just go kill the two princes and then we leave. Reynolds wanted the freedom of traveling through the human world once again. As hard as it was to say, almost through their entire time here, they've barely been able to do much. Except for the times when they started that war, there was nothing else that had been entertaining to them. They've just been carried by Gray from one place to another, which isn't something they like. Gray didn't have any plans on staying in the gnome world any longer either. Without delay, he headed for the palace. He wants both princes dead today, and he could see that the flower might not be able to last any longer. The amount of miasma the flower could hold was limited, and since Gray was forced to overfill it, it looked like it might explode anytime soon. Walking around with what is probably strong enough to kill preparing to explode any given time wasn't a wise choice. You guys head to the portal we used to enter this world, I'll deal with the princes and catch up. Gray said to the trio. The trio nodded and turned to leave. Once again, the bunny leader stayed with Gray while Void went with the trio to keep them safe. Gray entered Capital City and sneaked into the palace, hoping to go unnoticed. He wanted to take the first prince by surprise as he uses the miasma to weaken him before putting him under control. The second prince was as good as dead. When Gray entered the palace, the first thing he did was to locate the second prince. The easiest way to infuse the miasma slowly into the first prince's body and go unnoticed was by using people he would stay in a secluded place with. He infused the second prince with some miasma and controlled him to have a private conversation with the first prince. After a few minutes, still not enough, he was able to sneak all the miasma in the body of the second prince to that of the first prince, but even with that, and adding to the one the necromancer had been doing, it still wasn't enough. Since that was the case, Gray went to the necromancer and did the same with him. At this point, the first prince was starting to sense that he was getting weaker. He was about to rest when Gray told him he had urgent information for him about the second prince. The first prince thought about it, and decided to let Gray in. After all, this was information about his younger brother who was fighting with him for the position of the emperor. Gray entered the prince's office and looked at him. He could see that the first prince was somewhat struggling, so he gave his longest bow to either of the princes before continuing with the conversation. Your Highness, what did you say you have to tell me about my brother? The second prince didn't have the time for formalities. Gray remained bowing, pretending he didn't hear the words of the first prince. The first prince looked at him a bit irritated, but he said with a slight growl, "Speak or get out." Chapter 1642 Make it uninhabitable. Gray didn't panic, he opened his mouth and asked softly, "How are you feeling, Your Highness?" The first prince was taken aback by Gray's question. He looked at him warily and asked, "Is this your doing, human?" "I dare not, Your Highness." Gray bowed hurriedly. "I only noticed your unease and asked to see if there's anything I can do to help His Highness." The first prince grunted and waved his hand, "Speak and leave." Gray nodded and started to tell the first prince about the mission he took on for the second prince. When the first prince heard about the qualities of the treasure, his eyes lit up. "Where's it?" the first prince inquired before requesting, "Hand it to me." November LBJNN. "I passed it to the second prince immediately after I returned." Gray replied, still bowing his head. The first prince wanted to stand up and noticed something wrong. Just as he was about to move, Gray's figure appeared before him and looked into his eyes. Gray's pupils shone with a blue light, and the first prince paused for a moment, and one could see chilly air coming from the first prince as if he was about to freeze into a block of ice, but it was only temporary as he was able to force it out almost instantly. Unfortunately, that was enough time for Gray to completely shatter his core. Mental attacks is something Gray doesn't use too often due to the opportunity not presenting itself, but whenever he gets a chance to use it, he doesn't hesitate. Gray couldn't help but look at the worried face of the first prince. "Don't worry, your highness, you won't feel anything." The neck of the first prince was crushed by Gray as he left him in a sitting position. No one knows he came to visit the first prince with the exception of the necromancer who was under his control. A smile appeared on Gray's face as he walked away from the place. He exited the palace, but that was only after he placed 4 people under his control. He dressed them like himself and his friends. Not just that, but he passed the flower to the second prince. He wanted to use the second prince to allow this thing to explode and cover the entire palace. Not just that, but that was the way he wanted to use that method to get rid of suspicion that would be on them if they just disappeared just before the explosion. Gray soon left the capital completely, heading straight for the city where the portal they used in entering the gnome world was located. They needed to head back to the human world. He was forced to stop midway as he softly grabbed his head. The number of people under his control simultaneously was too much for him to handle, and it was making his head ache. Even with the great increase of his mental energy during his time in the gnome world, it still wasn't enough to have so many people at once. The only way he was even able to take control of those 4 people was due to him discarding the body of the necromancer from the first prince's camp. Both bodies will be destroyed in the explosion anyway before anybody finds them, so he was not worried about that. Thinking about it, he was hundreds of kilometers away from the capital city, so there was no harm in destroying the capital now. Capital city. The second prince suddenly walked out of his room and headed to a place where an array was set. Gray managed to find a spot in the array that could enhance the impact of an attack, so he wanted to use it to ensure the miasma was enough. Before the array could be controlled from somewhere else, the explosion would have already spread across the palace and into the capital city. After getting there, the second prince, under the control of Gray, dropped the flower in the point of the array that could help it, and with a hand seal. Boom! The entirety of the capital city was rocked by the explosion that came from the palace. Inside the palace, a few people saw the second prince when he dropped the flower. Before they could react, they were caught in the explosion. The entire palace was alarmed and everyone ran out. Seeing the explosion rushing in their direction, they all turned around to escape. The explosion isn't the deadliest thing about the attack. The true killer was the miasma, and now with the aid of the array, the strength of the miasma would significantly increase. The 4 dressed as Gray and his friends rushed into the place to save the 7th prince. Everyone saw the 7th prince being caught in the explosion due to his low cultivation stage, but the group came right in time and entered the explosion, tossing the 7th prince away from the explosion, while being the ones caught in it. A few people saw this, but at the moment they were more concerned about leaving the range of the explosion. Almost half of the palace was destroyed before the top experts from the royal family stepped out. When they arrived, they forced the impact of the explosion down, minimizing the damage done to the palace. Unknown to them, their focus on the explosion gave the miasma the chance it needed to spread across the palace and capital city. Gray wanted to destroy the entire capital city and make it uninhabitable. The 3 elders from the royal family exchanged glances. Just as they were about to speak, their expressions changed. Their cultivation level was relatively high, so it would be hard for something to escape them, but with the aid of the explosion, they missed the fact that a miasma was spreading across the palace at a faster rate. Evacuate the city. There was no way they could stop this thing at the moment. Poison miasma is one of the hardest things to deal with, and since the gnome world has larger darkness elemental particles, they are stronger here. Chapter 1643 Level the capital city. Far away from the capital city. Gray and his friends looked at the portal they used in entering the gnome world. They've been here for a few weeks, and although it was dangerous, with Gray's ability to control people, it was actually very safe to stay in the gnome world. If not for their inability to use puppets, Gray didn't mind building a large influence in the gnome world and eventually usurping the throne. The best way to crush such a dominant empire is from the inside. When Gray's friends heard about his plan to destroy the capital city as well as killing most of the people in the capital, while also faking the group's death, they were left stunned. The fact that Gray could come up with a way to cover their tracks while leaving was a great thing. This way, there's no way for the gnomes to get suspicious of their sudden disappearance. They appeared out of nowhere, and died while also making sure the seventh prince, the person who brought them here, was saved. What an act of valor. We should leave, I'm already missing our world. Klaus urged. He wasn't in the mood to listen to Gray's evil doings. He would only feel safe after they're back in their world. Gray gave the bunny leader a look of inquiry, as if asking if he's done with whatever he needed to do there. The bunny leader nodded while twitching his nose. The second Gray saw this, a glint flashed through his eyes, and his expression turned stiff for a short second, but he regained his senses shortly after. Damn. Gray shook his head. The sight of the bunny leader made him recall how he was toyed with by a bunny while he was in the miasma. If not for the bunny, he would have been able to grow stronger. Although his physical strength has grown by leaps and bounds, he didn't use its full potential. When next I return, I'll deal with that stupid rat. Go, the capital is destroyed. Gray said convincingly. The others knew that he could see through the eyes of the person under his control, so they knew for a fact that the capital was indeed destroyed. Klaus was the first to pass through the portal. Reynolds and Alice followed right after them. Gray looked around, he took in a deep breath and walked into the portal. It was finally time to head back to the Aurora continent. After so long, they were finally leaving the gnome world and returning to their own world. The capital city. Just after the seventh prince was saved by the four people disguised as Gray and his friends, he left the area and disappeared into the city. A few seconds later, he reappeared outside the city with everyone who was exiting the city under the command of the royal family's elders. He rushed to one of the elders. Elder Weiss, where are my brothers? He looked at the elders with a questioning gaze. Other than the fourth and fifth princes, the first and second prince were nowhere to be seen. The third prince was killed, the same as the sixth prince, hence the reason all the princes rushed to the capital. Gray and his friends, under the command of the second and first princes, launched an attack on one of the top families in the gnome world and came to find out an older prince who wasn't vying for the position was involved. After the family was caught, the first and second princes didn't leave the palace, the same for the other princes. The fourth and fifth princes looked at the elders with questioning gazes as well. At the moment, all princes were on edge due to assassination on both the sixth and third princes, so the possibility of two other princes, the strongest among them being dead, scared the other two out of their wits. I can't sense their presence in the city, they must have left already. One of the elders said after a short moment of silence. A guard walked forward and bowed. The second prince was the one who dropped the item that caused the explosion in the palace. Myself and a few others saw him. What? The elder who just spoke almost bit his tongue when he heard this. He's close with the second prince, so hearing that he was the one who dropped the item which caused the explosion came as a huge shock to him. Not just him, but everyone else present were lost for words. That's impossible. Under such a blast, he'll die too. That's impossible for him to do. The elder couldn't agree with such words. The others nodded. They all knew how smart the second prince is. Even if he wanted to kill the other princes, he wouldn't do it at the cost of his own life. He wouldn't even do it in a way he would be caught, much less die by it too. Dying with the other princes wouldn't make him the emperor he is fighting for. We all saw him. He dropped the item, it's a strange flower, and then did some hand seals. The guard spoke once again. The elder looked at the other guards, and they all nodded, signifying that the guard wasn't lying. How's this possible? The elder was left mystified. From what they all knew about the second prince, they knew it was impossible for him to kill himself. They all exchanged glances and only thing was in their heads. What could force the second prince into doing something like this? The second prince might prefer to die than sully his name. Dying in this manner, even though he has nothing to lose, still felt uncharacteristic to the cunning second prince they all knew. The elder was about to speak, then he froze. Impossible. Boom. An even larger explosion shook the rest of the city. The power of the explosion was almost on the same level as an all-out attack of an 8th stage sovereign. If one looked clearly, they would occasionally see flashes of multicolored essence, 6 different essences to be precise. Chapter 1644 The world belongs to the young. Somewhere in the Aurora continent, Gray and his friends stepped out of the building where they found the portal to the gnome world. I wonder how everyone has been after so long. Klaus gave a big sigh as he stepped back into the human world once again. We only spent a few weeks there. Gray rolled his eyes when he saw Klaus's reaction. It felt like years to me, Klaus said with a serious expression. Gray couldn't be bothered with Klaus. He looked in the direction the entrance to the god's tomb was located. I wonder how they're coping in there. He knew there was no such place as a god's tomb, and it was all done by his father to give him the chance to sneak into the gnome world. What should we do now? Alice's question brought Gray back from his thoughts. Most of the people were familiar with her in the god's tomb. Alice added, "This is a good chance for us to improve ourselves." Gray explained, "I have that thing the second prince wanted, and with most of the top experts in each faction gone, that's the best place to cultivate in seclusion. Although the top factions and families sent in most of their experts to the god's tomb, 1 or 2 top experts are left behind to protect the faction or family in case of any emergencies." Klaus suddenly gave a wide grin. "I certainly do have things to say in that place with my new strength." Gray and Reynolds looked at Klaus's expression and couldn't help but feel pity for whoever might have bullied Klaus while they were stronger than he is. Now that Klaus has grown so much under such a short time, he might already be stronger than that person now. Knowing Klaus's pettiness, he will definitely take advantage of this to get revenge. Alice didn't have a problem with heading back to her faction to cultivate in seclusion. She wants to grow as much as she can before the war officially starts. The only way she could be of use is by growing stronger. With everyone coming to an understanding, they left the town and shared the item equally at a safe place before they all headed back to their respective factions. Gray didn't feel that much of a connection to the Dawson family whenever his parents weren't there. The thought of stopping by at the Dawson family came to his head, but he threw it to the back of his head and headed straight for his faction. The Permond faction. Gray entered the faction very quietly. He's someone that's well known at the moment, and a few people saw him entering the god's tomb, so if he is noticed now, it might cause a few troubles. The same went for Klaus and the others, but they knew the few people they could trust to sneak them back into the faction. Before leaving for the god's tomb, Gray told them to let their top experts in their factions aware of a few situations, so returning would be easier. Each of them had trustworthy people in their factions that were also powerful. In the case of Klaus, he was cherished by the faction leader, so naturally she didn't have any problems with his plan as long as he agreed to cultivate a secret technique when she returned. Alice and Reynolds had the help of a top elder in their factions. Gray was just like Klaus, cherished by his faction leader. He wouldn't face any issues. The faction leader even went as far as ensuring the few people who would cause trouble for Gray were with him in the god's tomb. Gray quickly located the elder who was left behind. Apparently, it was the same elder in charge of the secret domain he fought for after he joined the faction. He has had a few encounters with this elder and was quite familiar with him. The elder looked at Gray in shock. At the moment, he was in the 4th stage of the Sovereign Plane. When Gray joined the Permond faction, he was in the 4th stage of the Sovereign Plane while Gray was in the Overlord Plane. It has been a few years, and he felt he made a rather considerable improvement in his cultivation. Yet Gray has gone from the Overlord Plane all the way to the 3rd stage of the Sovereign Plane. He couldn't help but feel like the world was biased towards some people. "You've grown so much, kid," he commented after a while. He could even sense a huge threat from Gray's aura. Everyone in the Permond faction knows of Gray's freakish abilities to always fight across stages ever since he joined the faction. From the Overlord plane to the Venerable plane, he has always bested people within a stage of him. Even geniuses weren't left out of Gray's reach. Using this logic, he was almost 100% certain that at the moment, he's no match for Gray. "Thanks to your protection." Gray bowed to the Elder. He took a glance at the faction, and it was almost like he could see every part of the faction. Since becoming a sovereign, he hasn't really spent a lot of time at the faction. Now that he has returned, he decided to take a peek, and his senses have spiked. He could hear things clearly from a few kilometers away. He could see things that were a few kilometers away too. The Elder looked at Gray and didn't say a word. Gray stood in that position for a few seconds, before shaking his head with a sigh. "I'll take my leave now, I still have some things to attend to." Gray bowed to the Elder before disappearing from view. The Elder didn't even have the time to react before Gray vanished. The gap in strength was shown instantly. He shook his head with a wry smile. "The world belongs to the young." Chapter 1645. This is the best I can do. Ellipsis. A month flew by in the blink of an eye. The God's Tomb. How long are we going to continue this madness? Lucas, do you want us all dead before you undo this stupid seal? We've been here for 2 months. 2 whole months of constant fighting with the gnomes. We've lost so many people. And so have the gnomes. That's not the main thing. There's clearly nothing here for us, so what's the point of staying here any longer? We've managed to kill 5 of their top-ranking experts, but they killed 3 of ours. The fact that humans killed 5 experts from the gnome race while they lost 3 should have been reason to celebrate, but given the numerical advantage the gnomes have over them, it's not even a fair trade. Basically, there's almost a ratio of 2 to 1 when comparing experts and geniuses. For every 1 genius the humans have, the gnomes are certain to have at least 2. Humans not being fully united made their situation even worse. Luckily, thanks to Gray's help, a large number of necromancers were wiped out, even a few top experts. But some at the very top managed to escape from the clutches of Gray and his father. Lucas looked at the expressions of everyone present and gave an awkward chuckle. He could sense that these people didn't have the slightest interest in staying here any further. They've known for well over a month now that the God's Tomb was a sham, and they all suspected Lucas to have a hand in this, especially after Gray miraculously disappeared from the God's Tomb. Of course, there were a few more people who weren't seen as well, but Gray's relationship with Lucas, as well as the gnome's urge to kill him, made him a suspect to this scam. At least we've managed to wipe out most of the necromancers hiding in some families and factions. This is still a good thing. He muttered. You killed an elder from my faction, Lucas, don't think I wouldn't speak about it just because you're strong. An old man said coldly. Another younger lady stepped out. Our grand elder was killed as well, the Dawson family will surely give us a good explanation. They were necromancers, should they be left alive? Lucas asked them with a cold expression. He wasn't afraid of angering the masses, with his strength, he feared no one. So what if he killed them? What did these people want to do about it? Besides, he only killed people who betrayed humanity. These people should be grateful to him for removing such a huge hidden danger, yet they are furious with him, demanding an explanation. The old man and the middle-aged lady looked at Lucas with dark expressions on their faces. They aren't as strong as Lucas, although they are older. In a world where the strong are supreme, there's nothing they can do about Lucas killing their people. Especially now that he has such a good excuse. You're only making things up, why would you kill them without confirming it? A middle-aged man said with a smirk, you're only using your superior strength to bully the weak. The middle-aged man's words made everyone turn to look at Lucas, especially those families and factions that aren't as strong as the Dawson family. If Lucas could willfully kill people he doesn't like, then aren't they in danger too? Having to fight alongside someone that could come up with the most useless excuse to kill you because you're weak isn't something that sat well with all of them. Even a few of the top families and factions couldn't help but look at Lucas, curious as to what his reason was. Lucas didn't feel any pressure from the gazes of everyone. He looked at the middle-aged man and smirked. If I wanted to kill someone for the fun of it, you'd be dead by now. But you're someone who will fight alongside humans and not against us, so killing you is out of the picture. Lucas's words made the man freeze. Yes, according to his logic, Lucas should kill him too, since they have a deep-seated hatred for each other. Their family has been butting heads with the Dawson family for a long time now, yet Lucas didn't take this opportunity to kill him. Could he be right? Are those guys truly necromancers? The middle-aged man wasn't the only one who thought about this. Everyone in the Aurora continent were familiar with the clash between both families, and it's said that the conflict is the reason Lucas left his son alone. So basically, these guys made sure Lucas missed the growth of his son, and only until later years did they meet again. Everyone has come to know that the famous genius, Gray Dawson, is the son of the once famous geniuses Lucas and Martha. The two people who were regarded as the top geniuses of their era, giving birth to a freak like Gray is well within the expectations of everyone. Only after they confirmed Gray was the son of Lucas Dawson did he finally make sense. A genius of that caliber appearing out of nowhere is not something they expected to happen. There's no point in talking about the past. Since they're dead, we'll discuss that matter later on. Lucas, the gnomes don't seem to be interested in this skirmish any longer. The only reason they're still here is the fear of us invading them. An old man spoke up, dismissing the matter of Lucas openly killing some top experts. Enough time has passed. We've shown them we're not to be messed with. I think it's time we too head out of this place. Lucas nodded in agreement to the elder. I've stalled as long as I can, you better be back. He sighed at the thought of Gray still being in the gnome world. Knowing Gray, he knew he would have left the gnome world by now, but he couldn't be sure, so he tried to stall for as long as he could. Chapter 1646, Leaving the God's Tomb. Lucas was in the God's Tomb, trying to stall the experts from the gnome world as much as he could. Unknown to him, Gray had left the gnome world for around a month now. If he knew, he would have left this place a long time ago. Having to face the scrutiny of these people repeatedly over the past few weeks hasn't been easy, but he wanted to ensure Gray's safety in the gnome world, so he had to keep the top experts from the gnome world here. Even with the gnomes' overwhelming strength, they don't want to enter a life-and-death battle with the humans at the moment, as they aren't willing to sacrifice too many people. If not, they would have attacked them on a large scale a long time ago and not try to bide their time in hopes of recruiting a few more people from the human world. The plan of gnomes was simple: decrease the overall strength of the humans before attacking. There are a few people who aren't mentally strong enough that will be willing to watch the battle take place from the side while not involving themselves, and they would be left alive after the gnomes win. At the moment, to the gnomes, it is not a matter of if they win, it's just a matter of when they win. They also believe that most of the humans in the Aurora continent are aware of this too, so as long as they're promised survival, they believed some people would take the opportunity. The lesser the army on the side of the humans, the quicker the battle would be, since it would become an overwhelming victory on their end. However, even though they would win with all of humanity united, it would require a large sacrifice. The God's Tomb. Lucas took a glance at the people who created this seal with him. Normally, it would be easier if they all worked together, but he wanted to keep the identity of the others hidden, so he decided to do it alone. To be honest, he didn't think the seal would last this long given the battle that would take place inside, but to his shock, it did, and seeing that the space was still stable, he decided to continue stalling. In the end, he was forced to break the seal. He started with the hand seals. After a while, he gave a low shout, and the space started to shake. Everyone felt the ground tremor like an earthquake was about to happen. A few people who were firmly standing fell to the ground, looking around in horror. The shaking continued for a few more seconds. Somewhere in the God's Tomb. In a large building, voices could be heard. Hey, they're finally taking this trash down. No vel bjn.c ohm. I didn't think they'd last this long. They've still not come to the truth that all this is a futile struggle. The voices continued conversing while a gnome could be seen sitting on a throne. If Gray were here, he would have recognized this gnome as the emperor of the known world. He has seen this face through the eyes of the seventh prince, as well as the resemblance in the faces of the princes and the emperor. The emperor raised a hand, and the building fell silent. What's the final report? He asked nonchalantly. Approximately 5,000 people. A gnome stood up and said. And on their side? The emperor asked. The gnome who replied fell silent for some time before replying, around 2,100. The emperor kept the same expression on as he looked at the gnome reporting. He then looked outside the building, seemingly peering through the trees blocking his path, staring thousands of kilometers away. Some of the people dead there are our spies, correct? The gnome nodded. The emperor squinted his eyes. Since entering this place, he has been getting the feeling that something was off. Yes, they heard about the sign that appeared in the sky of the Aurora continent, and the sudden appearance of the god's tomb. However, he couldn't help but feel a certain unease after he entered the god's tomb. It was as if he was being tricked. At first the feeling wasn't too loud, but after spending a few weeks in the god's tomb and not seeing any signs of Gray Dawson, that feeling exploded. He sensed something wrong at that moment, and now, the humans are suddenly agreeing to leave the god's tomb. He looked everywhere with a cold expression. We'll leave after they're completely gone. The others nodded. None of them cared much about those who were killed. It was normal in war. The shaking soon came to a stop and a portal appeared in the sky, on the side where Lucas and the other humans were camped. Lucas looked at the rest of them and said, "You can start leaving." Some of the weaker groups were the first to leave from the portal. The losses were understandable in a war, and some of the people who entered the god's tomb were able to grow quickly within these past 2 months. Lucas stood by the side as he watched everyone slowly exit through the portal. He turned his gaze away from the portal and looked at the god's tomb. The place, which looked like it was about to shatter, regained its stability. He could sense a few people hiding deep in the god's tomb. From what he knew, these were top experts who didn't want to interact with others. Given their strength, he couldn't forcefully engage them, so he let them be. He waited patiently and the humans there were almost all out of the god's tomb. It took a few minutes, but in the end, the last people under their protection were out of the place. Lucas bid farewell to the others and left first. The others exchanged glances and all left. Through the portal, but didn't destroy it. Just like when they first entered, a few flashes of lights came from different parts of the god's tomb and passed through the portal, heading into the Aurora continent. Chapter 1647. A special type of crazy. The Aurora continent was buzzing once again with the return of the top experts. Other than Gray and his friends, only a few people didn't know that the god's tomb wasn't truly a god's tomb. So with the people who entered the god's tomb coming out with such a large number missing, they genuinely felt someone finally got the inheritance of a god-plane elementalist and in the end, would grow on to become a god. Gray and his friends were still focused on improving their strengths. The war would begin soon, and those with weaker cultivation will only turn out to become cannon fodders in this war. Neither Gray, nor any of his friends wanted to be grouped in that manner, so they naturally wanted to grow quickly. Adding the treasure they got from the known world, they were growing pretty fast. On Gray's end, he has shot to the 4th stage of the Sovereign Plane. One has to know that just 2 to 3 months ago, he was only in the 1st stage of the Sovereign Plane. Yet in the space of only 2 months, he has gone from the 1st stage to the 4th stage. The faction leader of the Permond faction returned, and on finding out from the elder that Gray was back and cultivating in seclusion, he heaved a sigh of relief. He knew of Gray's plan to sneak into the known world. To be honest, he was quite curious about how the trip went, but since Gray was cultivating, he didn't want to disturb him. At the moment, he is someone in the late stages of the Sovereign Plane, and the kid he protected some time ago is about to catch up to him in terms of cultivation strength. Gray's speed is unbelievable, Not just him, but his friends as well as a few of the younger generations in this era are advancing at a frightening speed, shocking the older generations. It's as if all of them were stimulated by something. The top experts feel it's the pressure of the looming war, and to a certain extent, they were right. Gray and his friends were improving rapidly because they wanted to have a role to play in the war, and they were not the only ones from the younger generation who had this conviction. Most of the top geniuses across the continent all had the same conviction: they wouldn't go down quietly. Another week went by before Gray stepped out of his seclusion. The faction leader's cave. You're about to enter the 5th stage. The faction leader was left beyond words. Gray was about to become a 5th stage sovereign within the space of 2 months. Growing 4 stages while in the Arcane, Origin, and Overlord plane is somewhat understandable, but a sovereign advancing this quickly is unheard of. Even while Gray was in the Venerable plane, the faction leader didn't recall him progressing this quickly. I was lucky. Gray scratched the back of his head awkwardly with a chuckle. He then asked, how did things go in the God's tomb? Better than expected. Your father had to face a lot of trouble. If we knew you were out sooner, we would have left that place a long time ago. The faction leader sighed at the thought of them overstaying in the God's tomb. He almost died on a couple of occasions, although he wasn't afraid of dying in battle. After getting to the level he is at the moment, if given the choice, he'd rather not die. He didn't hide what happened in the God's tomb and told Gray about everything that happened inside. Gray was shocked at his father's ruthlessness. Lucas killed someone from a prominent faction after realizing he was a necromancer. This was someone at the peak of the Sovereign plane, yet. According to the faction leader, Lucas killed her within the blink of an eye. Father is just as overbearing as mother. Gray thought internally. He knew that his father wasn't one that cared much about what others thought of him, but the fact that he would kill someone that's supposed to be an ally, well, since the person was suspected of being a necromancer, their death was deserved. However, this was all due to only Lucas being the one that noticed this, so they could easily say he was using his strength to bully the weak. The faction leader saw Gray's unchanged expression and couldn't help but shake his head. To a certain extent, both Gray and his father had the same nonchalant expression always on their faces. N-O-V-E in .c. How about you? How was your trip to the known world? He didn't bother with the father and son and went on to ask about the important matter. Gray said he wanted to cause chaos in the known world. That way, the gnomes would give them more time since they have to deal with whoever attacked them. Either that, or they would retaliate almost instantly. The capital city, including the palace, has been destroyed. Most of the princes vying for the position of the emperor are dead as well. The ones left aren't any trouble. Gray didn't go in depth with his words, but his statement was enough to send tremors down the body of the faction leader. The faction leader looked at Gray in shock. He couldn't believe 4 youths entered the known world and turned it upside down. The courage it takes to even attempt something like that is out of this world. In fact, to him it wasn't courage, it was an act of brazen craziness that only a selected few geniuses can possess. In most cases, geniuses like these die from overreaching, but in the few cases where they grow to fulfill their potentials, they're frightening figures. Lucas Dawson could be said to be one of these crazy geniuses, and now his son has proven to be even crazier than the father. The audacity to not only have the thought but execute it left the faction leader speechless. Chapter 1648. No, a matter of if, but when. Gray spent some time with the faction leader, but left soon after. He still wanted to continue his training since there was still bits of essence left from the treasure he took from the second prince. The biggest gain in their mission wasn't killing off the princes or leveling the capital, rather, it was this treasure. The group has been able to grow by leaps and bounds just because of this treasure. Gray's already in the 5th stage of the Sovereign plane, yet he could still feel some leftover essence from his share of the treasure. Void and the bunny leader unfortunately didn't get any part of it. Well, it's not like they needed it. Void has grown to the 4th stage of the Sovereign plane, and so has the bunny leader. The duo were growing so fast even without the aid of the treasure. Taking into account the number of treasures the duo have in their possession, Gray believed him and his friends paled in comparison to Void and the bunny leader when it comes to treasures owned. Void alone has enough treasures to rival an entire family, not one on the level of the Dawson family, but certainly one that has a first or second stage sovereign as their strongest expert. An entire family's savings can't be compared to Void, who was just over 10 years or so. The fact that Void has gathered that much wealth is breathtaking, but it's nothing compared to what the bunny leader has. This was a magical beast who was already alive in the trial land before Gray even entered. It's unknown the number of treasures he holds, not to mention the magical gardens he used as his home. Even in the Aurora continent, some of the fruits Gray saw in the trial land were top tier, adding that to the other garden he met the bunny leader for the second time. He didn't even dare to imagine the items the bunny leader has in store. Over the past few months, he has tried to get the bunny leader to show him some of his wealth. The bunny leader obliged, but he noticed something after he asked again a few months later. The items the bunny leader showed him were completely different from the first ones, and most of them were also very rare, some he has never even heard of. Curiosity has been eating him, but given that his ability with the space element is vastly lacking compared to even Void, who the bunny leader is better than, there's nothing he could do. Gray went back into seclusion, not bothering himself with anything else. He had a friend in the Permond faction who lived close to him, but he hadn't sensed him around. He asked the elder keeping guard and was told his friend left on a training trip after the others entered the god's tomb. After confirming that he was alive, Gray didn't bother with searching for him and focused on his cultivation ever since. November LBJNN. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. Gray released a deep breath before taking a glance at his surroundings, which were starting to freeze solid. I've increased my ice ability. For a long time now, the element which Gray has seen grow the fastest without him putting in too much effort is surprisingly his water element, particularly his ice ability. Over the past years, he has tried to figure out why it was so, but no matter how hard he tried, he has never been able to find out the reason. Since he's a natural lightning and earth elementalist, it's normal if those two elements were the ones advancing at this pace. But for the other elements, he has to use them frequently and also try to understand them. Of all his elements, the fire and space element could be said to be his favorites, before adding the lightning, earth, water and the wind element. The light and darkness elements were rarely used by him. After a second or two of contemplating, Gray threw the thought to the back of his head. There was no point in figuring out something he had no clue about. It's just like the orb in his body. He doesn't understand it, and since he couldn't, he let it be. Since it's making him strong, what's the harm? Gray stepped out of his house, and the place was just as it was the first time he entered those years ago. He didn't even furnish it. He didn't have that time, and since he rarely gets visitors, he didn't bother with it. His figure vanished before anyone could see him. Outside the Permond faction. Gray appeared outside the faction. He took a look at it before disappearing. He wanted to check on his father to tell him of his mission in the known world. There were also a few people he would like to see close to the Dawson family manor. The trip to the Dawson manor didn't take long. With Gray's current cultivation stage, traveling has become easier. He could cover thousands of kilometers within the blink of an eye. As he moved through, even with such speed, he could still clearly see everything around him, from the tiniest blade of grass to the small bubbles coming from the depths of a lake. It was a surreal feeling, and if he was told at the start of his cultivation journey that he would grow to become such a powerhouse, he'd never believe it. At the moment, he was almost standing side by side with people that were thousands of years older than he is. His father could be said to be one of the few from the previous generations who has been able to grow to that length. Given Gray's talent, it's not a matter of if he could get to the half-god plane, but a matter of when he would become a half-god plane. Elementalist. Chapter 1649 Forgotten Promise. Gray took a glance at the region he was about to enter. It hasn't been more than a day since he left for the Dawson Manor, and he was already very close to it, but something kept tugging at his chest. He entered a cave and said with a sigh, "Come out." A little dragon appeared in the cave. Gray looked at the sad eyes of Eisendrache. He had almost forgotten about this young dragon that had been with him for some months now. He didn't mean to forget about him, it's just that he has been too busy with the matter of the known world, so he didn't have time to deal with him. When Eisendrache appeared, the aura he felt from Gray scared him. This was far stronger than the last time he met Gray, and it has only been a few months. Eisendrache was still a rank 5 magical beast. Even though Gray occasionally gives him some treasures, it's still not that easy to jump an entire rank in the space of a few months. Adding his mother's essence to it, he's already at the peak of the 5th rank, and could break through any moment now. "You promised to help me get revenge." Eisendrache communicated his thoughts to Gray. "I've been preoccupied with a couple of things over the past few months." Gray replied. He looked at Eisendrache and commented, "You're growing well. Not fast enough. Although I'm safe there, it's not the best way for me to train." Eisendrache shook his head in disagreement to Gray's comment. "I wish Void could hear this." Gray thought internally. Unlike Void, who would rather sleep all day, Eisendrache, a dragon, one of the greatest magical beasts in the world, preferred training outside, while Void on the other hand sleeps all through, and for some reason still not only manages to catch up to Gray, who's always working hard, but he also tends to always have the edge, same as the bunny leader. The duo were extremely lazy, yet they were progressing at a crazy speed. Gray looked at the dragon he was made to take care of after witnessing his mother die for him. Although he found it a bit of a hassle, he didn't mind it. After all, he had Void and the bunny leader. What's the harm in having another companion for his travels? Void. Void appeared on Gray's shoulder at his call. "We should help him with the revenge thingy," he said to Void, who had a bland expression on his face. "Sure, it's not like there's anything I'm doing here. Besides, I'd like to try these oversized lizards' meat." Void drooled at the thought of eating dragon meat. Dragons were very rare, so being able to eat their meat was more like a privilege to most people. Void isn't like most people, so he felt it was his right to taste all the meat in the world. A dragon's meat isn't excluded. If he ever encounters a phoenix, he would also try to get Gray to cook part of it. Magical beasts tend to have strong regenerative abilities. If the lizard is sweet, I will capture one and use it as my personal stash. Void thought internally. Having to always search for the right meat is difficult, so Void has the thought of creating a personal space he would use as a farm to keep magical beasts he finds their meats delicious. This way, whenever he wants to taste the exquisite meat of these magical beasts, instead of going out of his way to find them, he'd just search through his farm and bring it out. Cut out what they need and keep the rest of it alive. He didn't mind healing them after cutting off parts of their bodies. If Gray and Eisendrache knew Void's plan, they'd be lost for words. Klaus, on the other hand, will fully support this thought, since he too wouldn't mind having an indefinite number of rare and exquisite magical beasts waiting for him to eat. "Alright, I'll make a stop to help you get revenge. Killing that guy isn't an issue for the current me. I just don't want any trouble with the Dragon Clan. They tend to be very overprotective of their kind, so they wouldn't take me killing one too kindly." Eisendrache looked at Gray with hope. Seeing his eyes, Gray could only give up. "Don't worry, I promised to help you get revenge, and I will." Gray patted the head of Eisendrache and said, "Let's go." Gray kept Eisendrache hidden and left with Void. It has been a while since it has just been him and Void. The bunny leader is still with them, but like Void, he too didn't like coming out. He preferred to stay hidden, sleeping most of the day. Gray still found it odd that the duo were growing even when all they do is sleep. Within a day, they arrived at the forest. N-O-V-E in .c ohm. Gray looked around. When he first came here, he was still a venerable. Now that he has returned, he's a sovereign, a 5th stage sovereign that is confident in his abilities to fight against even those 7th and 8th stage sovereigns. The fact that he could achieve something like this is shocking. If he decides to use his greatest attack, the complete fusion orb, he is confident the strength of the attack might rival a 9th stage sovereign or even a peak sovereign. Thinking about it, he couldn't help but sigh at the thought of not being able to use the fusion plane any longer. If he still had access to that technique, he wouldn't have left the known world. Rather, he'd stay and silently kill off all the top experts in the known world. Unfortunately, he could only fight 2 to 3 stages ahead of him. If others find out that Gray is upset that he can only fight people 2 or 3 stages ahead of him, they'd cough out a mouthful of blood, and they try to kill him for mocking them in that manner. To most people, fighting even 1 stage ahead is already a huge achievement in the sovereign plane, yet Gray could not only go a stage ahead, he was also a bit confident against someone 2 stages ahead of him. Chapter 1650 Forgotten Promise 2. Gray looked at the familiar cave where he met Eisendrache's mother, Melmera. He couldn't believe it's only been a few months. He managed to kill a few magical beasts involved in the attack of Melmera during the first time he was here, but he wasn't able to kill the last 3 due to their cultivation stages being at the peak of the 7th rank, which was the venerable plane at that time. He would have been able to kill them if they were alone, but since the last 3 were together, there was no way he could kill them. At the moment, he not only wants to kill the trio, he also wants to kill the main instigator. The revenge will not be complete if he left that guy to live. He brought out Eisendrache. I'll bring the 3 others who were involved in your mother's death. I'll let you have the final blow. The same will go for the dragon who instigated her death. Eisendrache showed visible signs of happiness when he heard this. The essence here is better than in my spatial storage. Use this opportunity to try to advance to the 6th rank. You're still too weak. Gray disappeared right after saying this. Eisendrache didn't mind Gray's words. In all honesty, he too knew that he was too weak for this world. His mother was a rank 7 magical beast, yet she was still killed. He wanted to make sure he became too powerful for anyone to kill him. He started cultivating as soon as Gray left. Outside the cave, Gray appeared with Void on his shoulder. Void already knew about him killing 5 of the 8 people involved in Melmera's death, so he knew that at the moment, they were about to kill off the last 3, before heading over to kill the dragon that was the main instigator of her death. If given the chance, Gray wouldn't mind leaving Eisendrache with his clan members, but seeing how things are, he wasn't too positive about it. Target? Void asked. Gray thought about it for some time before replying, birds. A tribe of birds were involved. Void couldn't help but ask. Yes. The last 3 are all from a tribe among birds. They are always together, so it is almost impossible for me to kill them given my strength at that time. But now, they are a piece of cake. Gray replied. If he was given more time during the last time he was here, he would have been able to come up with a plan to kill them, but that chance didn't present itself, so he let them live. Unfortunately for them, their executioner is here once again, and this time, much more stronger. They might have had a chance given the previous Gray, but the current Gray will be able to kill them with a snap of his fingers. Gray is confident that they wouldn't have broken through to the 8th rank by now. Even if they have, there's no way they would be more than a 1st stage sovereign, so they weren't really a problem for him. Void didn't have any issues with this. He followed Gray as they headed into the depths of the forest. On the way, Void paused and said, "There's something good nearby." Gray didn't even hesitate. He paused and looked in the direction Void was staring at. He squinted his eyes and fell deep in thoughts. That should be the Snake Tribe's location. He wasn't too certain, but from what he could remember, that direction looked like it was the Snake Tribe's region. When he was a venerable, he wouldn't dare to wantonly go there from their treasure. But with his current strength, he didn't have any issues with going there. From what he could remember, the strongest snake in that tribe was only in the early stages of the 8th rank. With his current strength, he could sneak into the tribe, stay there for at least a year, and the strongest snake wouldn't even be able to pick up his aura, unless he wants it to know. On their way, the bunny leader appeared. There's a bunny tribe hidden somewhere here. I'm going there to recruit more soldiers. The bunny leader disappeared right after saying those words. To be honest, if he wanted to leave Gray, there's nothing he could do. But the bunny leader has come to enjoy Gray and Void's company. He wasn't doing any work, and hanging out with Gray means that he will be able to encounter more treasures as well as more bunnies he could recruit. Gray didn't have any problems with the bunny leader leaving, he rushed to the snake tribe. Seeing the familiar place, he couldn't help but shake his head. How things change within a few months. The first time he came here, he had to be very discreet, but now, he doesn't even need to bother with anything. There's no way these snakes would be able to sense him. He entered the tribe, and after following Void, he got to where the treasure was located. Oh, an array. He thought internally as he saw the array around the place where the treasure was kept. There were no guards, since no one from the snake tribe would dare to enter this place. A few snakes have tried in the past, and all of them, without any exceptions, were killed in the end. In fact, there are some snakes that were sent there if they were given the death penalty for any wrong act they committed. The array wasn't something that was difficult for Gray to break, he didn't even try to break, rather, he modified it in a way that he could enter, take the treasure and leave without anyone noticing that it's gone, at least for the first 2 to 3 days. He isn't scared of these guys, but he wanted to kill all 3 involved as well as the dragon involved as soon as possible before causing any alarm. With his strength, he was confident that within a day or 2, he should be done with eliminating all 4 people.